Hi everyone, today's video is about Burp Suite. So Burp Suite are the basics of it, like what is Burp Suite, why do we use it, how do you use it, and the fundamentals. So let's start with what's Burp Suite. Burp Suite is a framework written in Java that aims to provide everything needed for web application penetration testing. It is also commonly used when assessing mobile application, and that is because the same features which make it so attractive for web app testing translate almost perfectly into testing the API powering most mobile apps. So in its core functionality, Burp Suite is used to capture and manipulate all of the traffic between an attacker and a web server. And after capturing these requests, we can choose to send them to various other parts of Burp Suite framework, which we'll see later. So this ability to intercept, view, and modify web requests prior to them being sent to the target server is what makes it perfect for any kind of manual web app testing. And you have to know that there are various different editions of Burp Suite available. So depending on our needs, there is the Burp Suite Community Edition, which is free to use for any legal non-commercial use. And then there is also Burp Suite Professional and Enterprise editions. Those two both requires expensive licenses, but they come with powerful extra features. So Burp Suite Professional is an unrestricted version of Burp Suite Community. It comes with features like an automated vulnerability scanner, a fuzzer brute forcer that isn't rate limited, because on the community editions it is heavily rate limited. Saving projects for future use, report generation, which you can't have on the community edition, a built-in API to allow integration with other tools, unrestricted access to add new extensions for greater functionality, and access to Burp Suite Collaborator, which is a unique request catcher self-hosted or running on Portswigger owned server. Anyway, Burp Suite Enterprise is slightly different. Unlike the community and the professional edition, it is used for continuous scanning. So it provides an automated scanner that can periodically scan web apps for vulnerabilities, and it sits on a server and constantly scans target web apps for vulnerabilities. It's working in the same way as softwares like Nessus performs automated infrastructure scanning. So unlike the other editions of Burp Suite, which allow us to perform manual attacks from our own computer, Enterprise sits on the server and constantly scans target web apps for vulnerabilities. So now that we've talked about what are the different editions of Burp Suite, we'll focus on the community editions and its features, because we're broke and this one is free. So the features that we get here are the proxy, which is used to intercept and modify request responses when interacting with web applications. The repeater, which is the second most well-known Burp Suite feature after the proxy, allows us to capture, modify, and then resend the same request numerous times. This feature can be absolutely invaluable, especially when we need to craft a payload through trial and error, like SQL injection, for example, that we've seen in a previous video. You can go watch it if you want. Or when testing for the functionality of an endpoint for flow. Intruder is used to spray an endpoint with requests. It's often used for brute force attacks or to fuzz endpoints. However, in the community edition, this is heavily rate limited, but still a good thing to have. Then there's the decoder. Decoder is used for transforming data either in terms of decoding captured information or encoding a payload prior to sending it to the target. Even though there are other services available to do the same job, like base64 encode or base64 decode, if we are talking about that, or cyberchef, this is nice and good to have directly within Burp Suite, which makes it very efficient. Then there's comparer. So comparer allows us to compare two pieces of data at either word or byte level. And again, this is not something that is unique to Burp Suite, but being able to send potentially very large pieces of data directly into a comparison tool with a single keyboard shortcut can speed things up considerably. Then there's the sequencer. We use it when assessing the randomness of tokens such as session cookie values or other supposedly random generated data. Because if the algorithm to generate this data is not generating secure random values, then this could open up some devastating avenues for attack. In addition to all these, the fact that it's written in Java, it's the Java code base of Burp Suite makes it very easy to write extensions to add to the functionality of this framework. And the extensions can be written in Java, Python using Jython interpreter, or Ruby using the Java gRuby interpreter. The Burp Suite extender module can quickly and easily load extensions into the framework, as well as providing a marketplace to download third-party modules. The marketplace is referred to as the Burp Store. Even though many extensions require professional license, there are still a good number that can be integrated with Burp Community. For example, Logger++ module extends the inbuilt login functionality of Burp Suite. It's very useful to have this tool around, whether we are explicitly assessing a web or mobile application for pen test or bug bounty, or we just simply want to debug a new feature in a web app we are developing. So for these reasons, it is important to know how to install Burp Suite on a variety of platforms. The good thing is it already exists on pentesting OSs like Parrot and Kali, and even if you don't use those, it's easy to install because Portsugar have made dedicated installer for Linux, macOS, and Windows. Because it's a Java application, we can also download it as a jar archive that run on anything that supports the Java runtime environment. So if you want to download it, for example, and install it on your Windows, you can go to Portsugar. The link to the latest version of Burp Suite Community will be in the description box, so you can go there, choose your own OS and download it and install it. But I'm practically sure that almost everyone that's watching this video will be using either Kali or Parrot, so let's go to the next part, the dashboard. So once we have installed Burp Suite, or when it's our first time opening Burp Suite ever, there be like terms and conditions to accept. Like every application we install or we run for the first time. But after that, we'll get this. So this is the first window that you'll see after opening it every time you open it. But in the Burp Suite Community Editions, there is no choice for this window because we only have a temporary project possibility. And then you can use the default Burp or you can load from a configuration file if you have a configuration file for how you like your Burp Suite Community Edition to be configured. And then when we start Burp Suite, here's the dashboard. So it can be daunting to see this dashboard for the first time with all these these four windows, but I'm gonna explain each of them. So the first one is the task menu, and it allows us to define background tasks that Burp Suite will run whilst we use the application. So the Pro version would also allow us to create on-demand scans, but the default is live passive crawl, which will automatically logs the pages we visit. Then there's the event log. So the event log tells us what Burp Suite is doing, starting the proxy, for example, as well as information about any connections that we are making through Burp. The next one is the issue activity section. So this is exclusive to Burp Pro. It won't give us anything using Burp Community, but in Burp Professional, it would list all of the vulnerabilities found by the automated scanner. Because there isn't an automated scanner in Burp Suite Community Edition, that's why there isn't that. So these would be ranked by severity and filtered by how sure Burp is that the component is vulnerable, while the advisory section gives more information about the vulnerabilities found, as well as references and suggested remediation. So for example, in here, I clicked on OS command injection in the issue activity, and in the advisory panel, we see the details of it. While the question mark that we'll find all around Burp Suite in almost every tab or window is opening this. So it will open a new window containing help for the section, for example, like this, which can be extremely useful if you are stuck somewhere and don't know what the feature does. So click on them. Then the navigation. So navigating through the Burp Suite GUI by default is done entirely by the top menu. As you can see, these are the top menu. We can go to repeater, sequencer, decoder, proxy, and so on and so forth. So these allows us to switch between modules, and if the selected modules have more than one subtab, like for the target one, then these can also be selected using a second menu bar, which appears just below the original bar, as you can see. It is also common for module-specific settings to be provided in these subtabs. For example, in the Proxy one, we have these options. But it's not only in the Proxy. We can go for intruder, there are options that are module-specific, and so on and so forth. So each tab can also be popped out into separate windows, and for that you can just go to Windows and detach whatever the tab you want to detach. For example, if I want to detach the dashboard, here it is. If I want to reattach it, I can do this. I can do this, or I can just close this and it will be reattached. In addition to the menu bar, Burp Suite also has keyboard shortcuts that allow quick navigation to key tabs. And by default, these are these. So Control-Shift-D for switching to the dashboard, Control-Shift-T to switch to the target tab, Control-Shift-P to switch to the proxy tab, Control-Shift-I to switch to the intruder tab, and Control-Shift-R to switch to the repeater tab. If you want to know all the other hotkeys that exist, you can go to User Options, Miscellaneous, and here they are. You can also edit hotkeys to add a hotkey for things that you use a lot, Now let's look at what are the options. So before we start learning about the proxy module for Burp Suite, we should know what are the options available for configuring Burp Suite. So there are first global settings, which can be found in the user options tab along the top menu bar. And there is the project-specific settings, which can be found in the project option tabs. So the option provided in the user options tab will apply every time we open Burp Suite. However, the project options will only apply to the current project, which means editing the project options on the community editions is counterproductive, because every time you close the Burp Suite, first, you can't save a project, and every time you close Burp, it will reset. So, yeah. But let's go look at the options that there are anyway. So, on the user option tab, as you can see, there are 4 sub-tabs, which are connections, TLS, display, and miscellaneous. The settings here will apply globally. They control the Burp Suite application, not just the project, and many of them can be overwritten by the project settings. So there are 4 main subsections. The connection subsection allows us to control how Burp makes connections to target. So for example, we can set proxies for Burp Suite to connect through. This is very useful if you want to use Burp Suite through a network pivot. Then there is the TLS subtab, which allows us to enable or disable various TLS, so transport layer security options, as well as giving us a place to upload client certificates should the web app require us to use one for connections. So here the client certificate, TLS certificates that we can add. Then there is also the display. So this one allows us to change how Burp Suite looks. So what is the user interface? You can use between light and dark. I prefer mine to be light, but you do you. How the HTTP messages are displayed, and the character sets, and so on and so forth. So these are various options that to do with the rendering engine in Repeater. We'll see that in a future video. Then there's also the miscellaneous subtab, which contains like a variety of settings, like the hotkeys that I talked about just earlier, which by knowing the keybinds or the hotkeys, it will allows us to speed up our workflow massively. While for the project options, still there are 5 subtabs: connections, HTTP, TLS, sessions, and miscellaneous. The connection one holds many of the same options that were in the user options for connection, and these can be used to override the application-wide settings. So it is possible, for example, to set a proxy for just the project and override any proxy settings that are set in the user options tab. So there are a few differences between this subtab and that of the user options. However, for example, if we look at the hostname resolution, which is here, option, it allows us to map domains to IP directly within Burp Suite, and it can be very handy, as can also the out of scope request settings, which enables us to determine whether Burp will send requests to anything you aren't explicitly targeted. There's also the HTTP subtab, which defines how Burp handles various aspects of the HTTP protocol, for example, whether it follows, redirects, or how to handle unusual response code. So here's for the response codes, and here's for the redirections. Then the TLS subtabs, it allows us to override application-wide TLS options, as well as showing us a list of public server certificates for sites that we have visited. There's also the session one, and it provides us with options for handling sessions. It allows us to define how Burp obtains, saves, and uses session cookies that it receives from target sites. It also allows us to define macros, which we can use to automate things such as logging into web applications, giving us an instant authentication session, assuming we do have valid credentials. And finally, the miscellaneous. So for this subtab, there are fewer options than the one that was in the user options, the equivalent section. Many of the options here are also only available if you have access to the Pro version. Anyway, there are a couple of options that related to login and the abandoned browser that are good to know, and we'll be probably using at some point. Anyway, now on to Burp Proxy. So the proxy is the most fundamental of the tools available in Burp Suite. It allows us to capture requests and responses between us and our target, which then we can manipulate and or send to other tools for more processing before sending them to their destination. And this ability to intercept requests mean that we can take complete control over our web traffic. So let's try it. So we are into Burp Suite. I'm putting intercept as on, and I can go to try hack me. And as you can see, because the request is being captured, the browser is hanging. So here is the request, and the browser will still be hanging until I click on to forward. Once it's clicked on to forward, that request goes there. So there are multiple requests because, yeah. And here we go. Here we have try hack me is there. We can also choose to intercept the response from a request. Like for example, here is one request. I could just go do a right click and do intercept response to this request. We can also edit the request. So for example, okay, let's do it again. So we can modify something over here. For example, let's modify the user agent and just send it like this, and it will be sent like that. Anyway, so while we are using the proxy and by default, everything that passes through will be logged. The request made through the proxy when the intercept is. So this is while intercept is on, but even if intercept is off, so I can just continue going somewhere else, like for example, let's go to CyberChef. So the requests that were just made are also logged in even when the intercept is off, which can be very useful for going back and analyzing prior requests. And we can see the logs here on HTTP history. Here they are. And we'll also see at the same time. So if I click on something, this is the request that was sent, and this will be the response. Like, for example, the last thing when I asked for CyberChef, here's the request, and this is the response that I got back, and so on and so forth. We also can send a request to different tools of Burp Suite, like for example, send to repeater or intruder or sequencer, and so on and so forth. There's also the WebSocket history, which is here, and there's also the sub-tab options, which is specific to the proxies options, and these options give us a lot of control over how the proxy operates. So for example, there's the proxy listener. So this is what Burp Proxy uses to listen to receive incoming HTTP requests from our browser, and we need to configure the browser to use one of the listener as its proxy server. So here there's just only one. We can add another one and bind it to a port. Like for example, I'm gonna add this one, and I could but once I do that, I still have to properly configure my web browser or my browser to be sending everything to this proxy. So I'm just gonna remove that one because I don't need it. There's already one running. In the intercept client request, we can use this setting to control which requests are stalled for viewing and editing in the intercept tab. So you can get, for example, here file extension does not match these file extensions, or we can edit it to say that we want JavaScript to be intercepted. So I would remove this file extension from this list because it says doesn't intercept files with these extensions, which if I want JavaScript to be intercepted, I have to remove it. Same for intercept server responses. So the proxy will not intercept server responses by default unless we explicitly ask it to on a per request basis. So we can override the default setting by selecting the intercept response. So here, intercept response based on the following rules, which is here, and then we can add like these. So here that would be content type header matches text, or we can also say request was intercepted or request was modified. So that will change the way that the proxy works, and it will intercept the answers to our requests automatically. Or we can also do end URL is in target scope. So this being in the target scope is a very good default rule, and we'll be looking at scoping a bit later. We can also add rules for most of the proxy options. So this is something where you can look around, experiment, and so on and so forth, so you know what you want to add or remove. There's also the match and replace settings or options, and these settings are used to automatically replace parts of requests and response passing through the proxy. For example, if you want to emulate Internet Explorer, or if we want to emulate iOS or Android, we could just click on this. So the request where there's the user agent will be changed to this instead. You can look it more like this. So this is for Android, this is for iOS, so iPhones, and this is the user agent used by Internet Explorer. And there's more here. You can also add rules. You can use regex for it, or regular expressions, and many other options that you can look at and try to understand what they are and why are they there and how to use them. So we talked about the proxy of Burp Suite. However, if we want Burp Suite proxy to work, we need to configure the browser. So to configure our browser, there are two ways to do that. Either using the embedded browser. So instead of configuring the browser that we are used to use, like Firefox or Chrome or whatever, we would be using the embedded browser from Burp Suite. Or we configure the web browser to proxy our traffic through Burp Suite. And this is by knowing what is the web interface used by Burp Proxy, and it's this one, so port 8080 on the localhost by default. But as you could see just before, we can also add another listening proxy in the proxy options, and we need to redirect all our browser traffic through this port before we can start intercepting it with Burp. So to do that, we can either alter our browser settings, or we can use an extension called Foxy Proxy that is on Firefox. So Foxy Proxy allows us to save proxy profiles, and you'll see it as a small file like this. So here my Foxy Proxy is already installed and already configured, but we can go back to the configuration. So this is the configuration. You would add, so instead of adding, because I already have it, you just name it. Let's see, Burp2, because I already have one. And then here, using the configuration for this proxy, for Burp Suite proxy, we would be adding the IP address, which is our localhost, and the port, which is 8080. And we can save this. So if we want to be on one or the other, we can turn off Foxy Proxy, turn on Burp2, which I just created, or turn on Burp. And you find in the description box below the Foxy Proxy extension URL to download it. So now that we've configured Burp Suite for the Foxy Proxy also on our browser, what we can do is try to go to a web page. So let's put the intercept on, go to the browser. So once I click on forward, I get like more requests, and then ta-da, it's not hanging anymore. And we have the answer. Just something that is important to remember is while your proxy is on and the proxy intercept switched is on, your browser will hang whenever you make a request. So this is a very common mistake that we do at the first stage of using Burp, and it is to accidentally leave the intercept switched on and being able to make any web requests through your browser. And if your browser is hanging and you don't know why, check your proxy. Another thing that can be a problem is if your proxy here is on Burp Suite and you didn't launch Burp Suite, so it's still not launched, you'll have another error too. So you won't be able to access any website. So remember these two problems that could happen to you. Until now, it was easy. We just proxied HTTP. However, most websites nowadays uses TLS, so they use HTTPS instead of HTTP, and so the problem is when we want to go to an HTTPS website, so a website that uses HTTPS, we'll get a problem. So let's try and go to https.google.com, and that is what's happened. So we'll get this error: software is preventing Firefox from safely connecting to the site. And this problem comes because it's searching for the Portswigger certificate authority, and it's saying, like, Firefox is telling us that this Portswigger CA or certificate authority isn't authorized to secure the connection, and it could be an attack, meaning we need to remediate to this. So how do we remediate it? Is by having the certificate for that one. For that, we have to have the proxy activated, go to burp/cert, and download the certificate file. So we would go to http burp then cert, and it will open this, and we save the file. So as you can see here, once we go to google.com, problem. So once we download the certificate, we go to view certificates in our browser, and we import the certificate that we just downloaded. And we need to trust this CA, and that's it. Once this is done, we can go back to Google and everything works as a charm. So another way, instead of configuring our browser, we can also just use Burp Suite browser. So the Burp Suite browser here, you can open the browser. The Burp Suite browser is this like a Chromium browser based, and it is pre-configured to use the proxy without any of the magic verification we just had to do before using it. So even though it may seem a good thing to use it, we tend as people to just stick with the browser that we are used to work with, and because it gives us a lot more possibility to customize them. So once we open the browser, this is what we get. And there are a lot of settings to do with the Burp browser, whether it's in the project options tab or the user options tabs. But you have to know that sometimes you get this error. And this is an error that comes up when we are running on Linux as a root user. So Burp Suite is enabled to create a sandbox environment to start the Burp browser. And it causes it to throw an error and then die. So there are two solutions to this problem. Either create a new user and run Burp under a low privilege account, or check the allow the embedded browser to run without a sandbox option that is in the project options miscellaneous embedded browser. So checking this option will allow the browser to start, but be aware that it is disabled by default for security reasons, because if we get compromised using the browser, then an attacker will have access to our entire machine. So another thing which is really important, like after the proxy, is scoping and targeting. So scoping, or setting a scope for the project, allows us to define what gets proxied and logged. Instead of having everything captured and everything logged, including traffic to sites we aren't targeting, it muddies the app logs we may later wish to send to clients. So in short, allowing Burp to capture everything can quickly become a massive pain. So the solution is scoping. How we do it is by restricting Burp Suite to only target the web application that we want to test. And for that, we can go to the Target tab, right-click on the target from our list on the left, then choose Add to Scope. And then Burp will ask us whether we want to stop logging anything which isn't in scope, and most of the time we want to choose yes here. So you can go here on target, look at, this is our target, right click on it, add to scope, and yes. And we can go to the scope. We see that in the target scope, we got this added. So define the in-scope targets for your current work. This configuration affects the behavior of tools throughout the suite. The easiest way to configure scope is to browse to your target and use the context menu in the sitemap to include or exclude URL path. So here we are including this scope. Now, once this is done, we can go to the proxy options and check the end URL is in target for intercept client requests. So with this option selected, the proxy will completely ignore anything that isn't in the scope, vastly cleaning up the traffic coming through Burp. The control of the scope may be the most useful aspect of the target tab, but it's by no means the only use of this for this section of Burp. There's also 3 sub-tabs under target. There's sitemap, which allows us to map out the apps we are targeting in a tree structure, and every page that we visit will show up here, allowing us to automatically generate a sitemap for the target simply by browsing around the web app. Burp Pro would allow us also to spider the target automatically. Meaning, what we mean by spidering is looking through every page for links and use them to map out as much of the site as is publicly accessible using the links between pages. However, with Burp Community, we can use it to accumulate data whilst we perform our initial enumeration steps. So the sitemap can be especially useful to map out an API, as whenever we visit a page, any API endpoints that the page retrieves data from whilst loading will show up here. The other subtab under target is scope, which controls Burp's target scope for the project. And then the third one is issue definitions. So even though because we are using Burp Suite Community, we don't have access to the vulnerability scanner in Burp Suite, it still gives us access to a list of all the vulnerabilities it looks for. So the issue definition section gives us a huge list of web vulnerabilities which we can draw from, and should we need citations for web report or help describing a vulnerability. So we can look at here. As we already saw the scope, here's the issue definition with different issues, like for example this one or this, and it has description, remediation, vulnerability classifications, and what is the typical severity for this type of vulnerability. On the sitemap, we get a tree like this, for example, and we can click on any of it. So let's just put the proxy. Okay, the intercept is off, and let's just open all the web pages there are, all the links that are here, and see if there's anything that sticks out, because that's the questions. So let's go back here, and there's this page which is weird, and here we go. Now let's have a look at how to set up and configure our proxy, and let's go through a simplified example. So while we were looking here, there's this web page which is a support ticket. So in general, we would be like in a real world pen test. We would test this for a variety of things like cross-site scripting, for example. If you want to know what is cross-site scripting or to dive into cross-site scripting, you can go watch the video I did on this topic. It will be linked down below. So if we look at the page source, and we go look at the page source and we read it, we can see here email filter .javascript, and it's filtering emails. So before that, let's just try a normal, like, as you can see, every time I put this, it gets replaced. So, and what if I type it here? If I type it here, it's okay, but let's focus on the contact mail. Now we know that the contact mail from this page source has a client-side filters, and this is easy to bypass by using Burp. So let's try and bypass this filter. Okay, I'm going back here, going to the proxy, intercept is on. Now that the intercept is on, what I can do is reload the web page. So this, I want to intercept the response, but because it was a JavaScript, I have first to modify the option here. So to modify it, as you can see, the JavaScript files, like file extensions that ends with JS, so JavaScript, won't be intercepted, and I want them to be intercepted. So I go here, I remove this. Now I know that JavaScript files will be intercepted. Going back here and do intercept response to this request and forward. Now I have to get the email filter.js. Let's see. Oh, as you can see here, there's nothing back to this one. So do intercept. So this is the get for this email filter.js that we want to modify. So let's forward it and see when we get the answer. If you can see here, this is the response ticket, which is HTTP 304 response code with not modified. Because we already opened it before, it's in the cache of our web browser. So what we have to do is, go to the web browser, settings, and let's go to the cache and clear data. So once this is cleared, this is cleared, we can do the whole thing again. So let's get back to this. And move all this. Yeah, not this one. So I could maybe change it here. Let's see. Forward. And here we have the JavaScript that is verifying the email. So I'm just gonna, now that this is done, we can go back here, and as you can see, I can write down what I wasn't able to write just before. So I'm gonna put the JavaScript script. Let's just put an alert and see if it works. So it still is asking me for an email address. So instead of doing it here, what we can do is using a real legitimate looking email like this. Here we could change this with our script. So and forward. And here we go, as you can see. So now we've been able to bypass the filter, as you could see. Thank you for watching. That was it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video talking about the basic of Burp Suite. We'll be looking into more Burp modules in the next few videos. Have a good day. Bye!